The ink is barely dry on October 27, 1985, when the Washington Post forces a reckoning with Jack Anderson and Dale Van Atta's expose on Project 68. This isn't an isolated scandal, it's a cipher. Project 68 stands as a direct extension of MKUltra, the CIA's covert mind control program run by the Office of Scientific Intelligence. The code breaks down to reveal the architecture of control. MK designates sponsorship by the Technical Services Division, while Ultra marks the classification level. $60,000 moved through the ledger. A Treasury front group funnels cash into a university, wrapping chemical interrogation research in the guise of legitimate academic inquiry. Inside operational files, the term repugnant appears in internal memos. Even handlers who authorize these protocols hit a moral event horizon, recognizing experiments that exceeded acceptable conduct. Project 68 triggers a lawsuit, dragging the agency into the light, but the mechanism of deception demands an answer. How does a university grant in the mid-1980s trace its lineage to a black-budget operation launched in 1953? The trail leads back to the source, where the definition of research was rewritten overnight, turning campuses into laboratories for the human mind without a single warrant or warning. They didn't just write a new definition for research, they erased the line between science and experimentation on living humans. Let that sink in. The mechanism didn't emerge from a debate. It was forged in the signature of Allen Dulles on April 13, 1953. MKUltra wasn't a proposal submitted for review. It was a mandate that surgically removed the CIA's own conscience and replaced it with a weaponized directive. The Cold War had just delivered a psychological shockwave. American prisoners of war returned from Korea, with minds shattered by Soviet, Chinese, and North Korean interrogation techniques. Intelligence analysts watched those broken men and realized the enemy held a terrifying advantage. The response wasn't diplomacy. It was an immediate, ruthless campaign to replicate and surpass that power. The architecture of this campaign relied on a cryptonymic shield. MK signaled direct sponsorship from the Technical Services Division, while Ultra marked the project as the agency's absolute priority. This labeling convention did more than hide the program. It redefined reality within the bureaucracy. By attaching Ultra to scientific inquiry, the CIA effectively rewrote the definition of research itself. Peer review vanished. Institutional ethics boards were bypassed by design. The director of MKUltra operated in a financial vacuum that defied standard government accountability. He was granted 6% of the entire CIA operating budget in 1953, with zero oversight and no accounting requirements whatsoever. This wasn't just funding, it was a structural anomaly, a black hole where money flowed freely, without a single receipt or audit trail. The sheer scale of this autonomy meant the MKUltra director could effectively outspend entire operational divisions within the agency, prioritizing technical obsession over any other mandate. Over 30 universities and hospitals were rapidly recruited into this decentralized network, each institution receiving massive allocations that functioned as isolated silos of activity. The proliferation was so aggressive that by the end of 1953 alone, the program had consumed an estimated $10 million or more, creating a web where no single official could see the full scope of the operation. This fragmentation wasn't accidental. It was the ultimate insurance policy against exposure. If one lab raised questions, the others continued untouched, shielded by the sheer volume of independent contracts. Early efforts immediately latched onto LSD, which quickly came to dominate many programs as the preferred chemical instrument for breaking down cognitive resistance, shifting the focus from behavioral conditioning to pharmacological domination. The system was engineered to ensure that while individual labs pursued their grants in isolation, the central mechanism remained invisible, turning the nation's academic infrastructure into a distributed arsenal of mind control, while the bureaucracy maintained plausible deniability at every level. But this architectural perfection created a fatal flaw. When you remove all constraints from human experimentation and fund it with unlimited resources across 30 isolated sites, escalation becomes inevitable. The question wasn't whether the program would push boundaries. It was which specific test first demonstrated that the CIA had accidentally built a machine capable of destroying its own operatives, leaving the agency to wonder if they could ever reclaim control over the weapon they created. So they built a weapon that eats its creators, and then just kept it in a box? That's not science fiction, that's bureaucratic hubris with a body count. The architecture of total secrecy breeds a singular, fatal flaw. When you remove every constraint, escalation becomes inevitable. You create a pressure cooker where the only way out is through the mind itself. And soon, that pressure would find its first victim in the very people who built it. November 18, 1953. Deep Creek Lodge, Maryland. Dr. Sidney Gottlieb convenes a meeting of CIA and Army researchers to test compliance limits. During this gathering, 8 of the 10 men present, including Frank Olson, a United States Army civilian biochemist and biological weapons researcher, consume a small dose of LSD laced into their liquor. The agency's own internal investigation would later conclude that while Gottlieb had conducted the experiment with Olson's knowledge, neither he nor the others knew what drug they had ingested until some 20 minutes later. That gap in awareness is the first fracture. Olson walks out carrying a chemical variable no one controlled and no one understood. The consequences arrive with brutal speed. Frank Olson suffers a severe reaction to the LSD he consumed as part of this CIA-led research program. By November 28, 1953, uncontrolled trauma has shattered him completely. Frank Olson jumps to his death from a hotel room in New York City that date. The agency's records dismantle the suicide fiction. They admit the exposure caused profound psychological effects that directly contributed to his breakdown. Olson was a biochemist who understood the science. His collapse proves these agents don't discriminate between target and operator. Uncontrolled variables in a closed loop kill the source. The system doesn't learn from this warning. It doubles down on the failure. By January 1957, MKUltra demands a more permanent solution to behavioral control. The CIA approves a $60,000 grant to Dr. Ewan Cameron for Project 68. Cameron is a world-renowned psychiatrist at the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, trusted by an intelligence community desperate for results. John W. Gittinger testified that he was interested in Cameron's work on voice stress analysis, which he figured would help the CIA in its studies of stress during interrogation. But the application reveals a darker reality. Cameron proposes experiments including the breaking down of ongoing patterns of the patient's behavior by means of particularly intensive electroconvulsive patterning. He explicitly states, "We propose to use LSD-25 and other similar agents as a means of breaking down the ongoing patterns of behavior." Here lies the catastrophic collision of agendas. Cameron believes he is curing schizophrenia by wiping the mind clean. The CIA wants to create a blank slate for interrogation. Total psychological destruction follows. John W. Gittinger testified in his 1983 deposition that he hadn't noticed the LSD proposal in Cameron's application. He missed it because compartmentalization was so absolute and oversight so non-existent that the CIA funded mass mind-wiping without reading the fine print. No qualified scientific observers, no controls, just raw chemical variables applied as a weapon. The Olson incident wasn't an anomaly. It was a prediction. The system proved it could destroy its own operatives. But now it faces a new threat. The subjects are waking up. The blank slate Cameron promised is filled with screams, and the agency has lost control of the very mechanism they created. Cameron wanted a blank slate? Looks like he got exactly what was coming to him. When you play God with human minds, don't be shocked when the subjects start biting back. The patients are stirring. Cameron's wards wake up, and the silence breaks. Human testimony becomes an uncontrollable variable. Containment shifts from stopping leaks to erasing evidence itself. 1973. Richard Helms initiates a scorched earth tactical maneuver. CIA Director Richard Helms ordered all MKUltra files destroyed in 1973. This isn't housekeeping, it's a preemptive strike against congressional scrutiny. By turning paper to pulp, Helms weaponizes the absence of records. The destruction creates a permanent legal disability for every victim who sat in Cameron's chair or ingested an unmarked dose. Without files, victims cannot prove harm. Truth becomes hearsay, and hearsay dies in court. The destruction didn't just hide the CIA's fingerprints. It stripped the victims of the very tools required to demand accountability, freezing their claims in a state of permanent evidentiary limbo, where the burden of proof becomes an impossible mountain. But momentum survives shredders. The project was first brought to wide public attention in 1975 by the S. Congress, through investigations by the Church Committee and the Rockefeller Commission. Walls crack under subpoenas. The agency faces the light, revealing not sophisticated intelligence, but chaotic guesswork. The agency acknowledged that these tests made little scientific sense, and the agents doing the monitoring were not qualified scientific observers. This admission strips the program of any veneer of legitimacy. The CIA admits its science was nonsense, conducted by spies who couldn't distinguish a placebo from a breakdown. Unethical? No. Epistemologically bankrupt. The reckoning hits the Senate floor. Senator Ted Kennedy stated on the Senate floor in 1977 that over 30 universities and institutions were involved in extensive testing and experimentation programs. Senator Ted Kennedy noted that several tests involved the administration of LSD to unwitting subjects in social situations. At least one death, that of Dr. Frank Olson, resulted from these activities. Universities, parties, unsuspecting citizens, turned into test tubes while a spy vanishes into a Manhattan fall. The scale suggests a systemic rot where national security became a blank check for psychological experimentation across the entire American social fabric. Victims fight back against a shifted ground. Civil rights attorney Joseph Rao files a lawsuit alleging the CIA funded psychological experiments on Canadian citizens under Project 68. The lawsuit filed by Joseph Rao alleged that at least 9, and possibly more than 50, Canadians were unwitting CIA guinea pigs. Defense relies on bureaucratic evasion. The CIA insisted in its defense against Rao's lawsuit that it had not solicited Cameron's application for the grant. Internal memos exposed the rot. Gittinger testified that one reason for exporting MKUltra was that association with a psychiatrist of Cameron's renown would be good cover for the CIA front group. Years later, in retrospect, Gittinger acknowledged 26 years later that the decision was a foolish mistake, and a terrible mistake, because the program turned out to be of no interest to the CIA. The cover failed. The science collapsed. Only damage survived. Olson's family receives a settlement, not justice. Frank Olson's family received a $750,000 settlement from the United States government in 1976. President Gerald R. Ford and DCI William E. Colby met with Olson's family to publicly apologize. Apologies don't resurrect the dead or heal shattered minds. Decades pass. In 2002, members of Olson's family announced they were dropping their pursuit of allegations of agency foul play. The file destruction succeeded legally, turning a crime scene into a void. But the survivors carry damage no settlement erases. As legal battles grind to a halt, one question eclipses the shredded paper. If the CIA could weaponize universities and hospitals undetected for decades, what other shadow programs are still active, funded by the same unaccountable budget? They didn't just close a file, they erased the crime scene itself. And now we're left asking if the same black budgets funding this ghost story are still out there, quietly funding whatever nightmare comes next. The congressional firestorm didn't end the search. It drove it deeper into the shadows. You asked what other unacknowledged programs still pulse in those opaque budget lines. The answer is a metamorphosis. In 1964, the agency renamed the project MK Search, shedding the label while preserving the machinery. But Director Richard Helms delivered the true verdict: a single order to burn every document. $10 million and 30-plus institutions vanished into ash with that signature. You can audit a ledger, but you cannot audit a ghost. The methodology collapsed. The proof became smoke. We know Gottlieb secured Olson's consent, yet neither he nor his team identified the drug for 20 minutes after ingestion. That 20-minute blind spot mirrors the entire operation, intent masking total ignorance. Frank Olson's grave marker stands as a monument to this erasure. Survivors voice the void left in their minds. Black bars on declassified pages aren't ink, they're wounds. These blocks hide interrupted lives and silenced truths, proof the agency deemed certain knowledge lethal to its own citizens. When the state wields the pen and the fire, the price is never monetary. The cost is the human variable, lives excised from history until they vanish completely. They call it redaction. I call it a crime scene, where the evidence vanished off the page. Don't let them tell you that black ink means secrecy. It just means they ran out of time, and may be running out.